All right, part two of our cardiovascular system notes. Hopefully in the first part you learned about the structure of the heart, you learned about the chambers of the heart, the atria and the ventricles. You also learned a little bit about the blood vessels. Now we're going to put all that knowledge into play, all right? Now I know you're tempted probably on that first slide as you're watching this, probably doing your slides, hopefully, to just skip on ahead. Right? Because this one's already filled in. This is probably the most important thing we're going to learn this whole unit, because it teaches us all about the blood flow through the heart and through the body. Okay? If we can understand this, then pretty much everything else falls in line. All right? Also, there's some assignments coming up that deal with blood flow. Of course, on your exam, there'll be a lot of questions, so do not skip ahead. All right? Listen to me instead. That rhymed. All right, so let's look at this first slide. I put it next to a picture, the picture that you already had from last week on your Schoology page. So let's talk about blood flow through the heart. Now, this is a continuous flow. All these orders go in this order, but it's not like there's an exact starting point and stopping point. Just for simplicity's sake, say that 40 times fast. I like to start at the right atrium. Okay, so let's just start right here. Okay, and this would be blood coming into the heart. So that's why it's a good place for it to start. This is all about blood. This whole pattern here is blood flowing through the heart and through the body. This is the order that it goes through. Now, we use the colors blue and red, not because there's some blue blood or anything like that. That's one of my 5 things I want you to know when you get out of here. Your blood is never blue, okay? But it's easy to use it because it strikes against red so much, and it shows the contrast is blue is oxygen poor blood, meaning that it hasn't picked up that oxygen yet. It's not, it does have some in it, but it's not enough to really start carrying out to your body and continuing function, homeostasis. Red, however, is oxygen-rich blood, okay? Notice there's a couple of different colors here. It just talks about the lungs and the capillaries, those tiny blood vessels that I had to rush through the first part of the notes if you've already watched them, which you should have. So anyway, coming into the right atrium, blood flows through there. Now, it's going to go through the tricuspid valve and enter into the right ventricle. Okay, remember the bottom part's the ventricles. Now, from there, it's going to push out of the right ventricle. It's going to be pumped out into these pulmonary arteries. Remember, when you say pulmonary, think lungs. Okay, arteries always moving blood away from the heart. In this case, the only time that blood moving through arteries is oxygen poor, because it's going to the lungs to pick up that oxygen and also drop off carbon dioxide. We'll learn more about that process with the respiratory system, but hopefully, I pray that you know we need oxygen to live, and carbon dioxide is a waste product because of cellular respiration. Anyway, it moves out of the heart through the pulmonary artery. It goes to the lungs, picks up oxygen, and then it's going to come back through these pulmonary veins. Okay, pulmonary veins. Over here as well. We didn't label it on this one, but these are pulmonary veins as well. Got 2 set of lungs, got 2 set of veins. Okay, so from there, it comes into the pulmonary vein and enters into the left atrium. Okay, blood's come back. It's oxygen rich. It goes through the mitral valve and into the left ventricle. This is the super pump. This is the big pump, right? From there, it's going to go out in the body. Now, it's not as simple as we made it out to be, just like, oh, it's out in the body now. No, but it is leaving the heart, so we know it's going into an artery. Its first stop is the aorta, the largest artery in the body. If you punctured an aorta, you would die in could be less than a minute, depending on the size of the wound. And that's because all this blood is continually being pushed as hard, as much pressure as it can get up, right through that aorta. Now, if you were to puncture it or something right here, blood would spill out very quickly, because all this blood that's coming into the heart is going to gush out of there. So anyway, blood moves through the aorta. From there, just like a tree, branches from the trunk down to the branches, down to the smaller branches, down to the little tiny branches, out to the leaves, things like that. The aorta goes to the arteries, then to the arterioles, and then to the capillaries. And capillaries is those smallest blood vessels, and it's where oxygen and carbon dioxide are exchanged. Okay, so capillaries is what reaches out to all the different little tiny parts of our body that gives those tissues and organs a blood supply, an oxygen supply. Okay, from there the blood continues to go. They go through the capillaries. This exchange happens, and it's going to make its return trip to the heart. Okay, blood starts at the venules and then to the veins. Okay, and then to the superior and inferior vena cava. Okay. So it's kind of like just the opposite of the arteries, right? We left the heart and went through the biggest to the next biggest, or the medium size to the smallest type of artery, and then to these tiny little capillaries. Here we start smallest, this mid-size, and then the big mamas, right? The big veins, the vena cava. From there, it comes back to the right atrium and starts the whole process over again. Think of it as a big figure eight. Okay, a big figure eight, like an infinity symbol, if that helps you think about it. Okay, to the heart, to the lungs, to the heart, to the body, to the heart, to the lungs, to the heart, to the body, to the heart, to the lungs, because that's the whole blood flow through the entire body. It starts in the heart, it goes then to the lungs, picks up oxygen, comes back to the heart, and then flows out to the body, and then eventually it makes its way back to the heart. Okay, this is super important. I'm going to include in our page on Unit 7 a song and maybe a couple other activities about blood flow. I'm going to tell you have a quiz on it. It'll be a long exam. You need to know this blood flow. Now, I like to study it along with the heart because as I know the structure, it kind of makes sense. It's kind of a 2-for-1 study. All right, so whatever helps you best. All right, looking at our notes now and continue on. I hope you stuck with me for 6 minutes. All right, so let's jump into a couple of diseases, disorders, things like that. All right, since we know the structure, we know the blood flow, let's talk about some things that can interrupt this blood flow. Plaque. These are fat and cholesterol deposits that happen pretty regularly inside our blood vessels. Now, if you're in good shape, good health, you got a good diet, you regularly exercise, most of the time these will not accumulate and stick into our blood vessels. They'll continue on, they'll get broken up inside the body, they'll never be able to cluster up like we can see. But when plaque builds up in arteries and veins, it is a very bad thing. We're going to look at a couple of reasons why. A heart attack or an acute myocardial infarction. That's right, not an infraction, an infarction. But it's a heart attack. That's what we call it. This occurs when those coronary arteries, remember coronary arteries, as we learned last time, are the arteries that supply oxygen-rich blood to the heart muscle itself. So the heart doesn't just like absorb it on the inside. It pumps it out, blood out of the heart, and then that blood eventually makes its way back to the heart tissue and keeps it good and strong, working healthy just like any other muscle in our body. So, but a heart attack happens when one of these coronary arteries become blocked by spasm or by blood clot. So if there's some kind of damage to it, it may cause a spasm, but more commonly, this plaque builds up inside the coronary artery, and it can block flow of the blood to that heart tissue. So what begins to happen, just like anything else in our body, if it's not receiving oxygen, it starts to die. So that blood, that heart tissue that's used to pump all the blood through our body starts to die. A heart attack's a very interesting thing in the way that it's these coronary arteries are the ones that get blocked up. So the heart can't do its job because the blood coming from the heart is getting blocked to the heart. It's kind of an interesting conundrum. So anyway, that's what a heart attack is when the coronary arteries get blocked. We're just today looking at symptoms and things like that. Later on, we'll look at what do we do about these things. So symptoms of a possible heart attack: chest pain and pain that radiates down the shoulder and arm, the left shoulder and arm. Okay, so if you have very intense pain, more like not really intense, it's like a numb pain, and also pain that starts at the shoulder and works its way down the left arm continuously, can be signs of a heart attack. So there's different ways to solve this. Of course, we mentioned diet and exercise over a long term, but let's say you have a plaque buildup. There's this thing called stents. It's this netting that can be put inside, say, the coronary artery, put inside there and inflated or expanded, and it can cause it to open up there and kind of push the plaque out to the sides, but allow this canal or this tube to stay open. Okay, so that's one way to get to it. Just a couple other diseases. Coronary artery disease. not to be confused with a heart attack. This is a progressive disease that happens over time. It's a narrowing of the small blood vessels that supply blood and oxygen to the heart. So again, we see this plaque build up and eventually can become blockage. If it blocks off that blood flow, blood's not able to get through, not able to get to that muscle tissue. I mentioned the pain a minute ago. This angina is what it's called. Angina is a specific type of pain in the chest caused by inadequate blood flow through the coronary vessels of the myocardium. In other words, this is the pain that you'd feel if a heart attack is occurring. A lot of people say it's almost like somebody standing on your chest. So it's not like sharp shooting pains, but it's like a continuous dull pain that's just a pressurized type pain. Okay, so think about if somebody stood right on your chest with all their weight. Yeah, that would start to hurt. It would feel like your muscles are getting tightened up because they're trying to hold that person up. But angina is what people say that feels like. Atherosclerosis is a disorder of the arteries. Again, this is where the symptoms are. Fat, cholesterol, other substances can stop up here. Now, these can be caused by different things. If there's small little wounds, I think that was one of our diagrams that showed that, things can get stopped up. Sometimes people just have almost like a sticky type arteries, and things tend to stick to it or collect to it. Of course, a horrible diet and lack of exercise can amplify that condition because you're getting lots of fat deposits through your body. Your heart's not being challenged to pump with all its might. It's just kind of used to being sedentary or sitting still. So atherosclerosis is a disorder of the arteries. Vasoconstriction is it's when they get narrowed up. This can also be a sign, instead of plaque building up, this can be a sign of certain disorders like atherosclerosis. Things become narrowed. So it's just like if you had a large, think about your garden hose at home, how much water can come out of that. And then think about a fire hose, okay? There's not as much pressure coming through it because it's not as open. It's not as wide. It's not as large of an opening. Vasoconstriction is a narrowing of the blood vessels, which restricts blood flow. An aneurysm, you may have heard of this before, is a protrusion of an artery. It's almost like the artery balloons outward, okay? Kind of gets ballooned out. It gets weakened in a certain place. Like imagine this berry aneurysm is not here. It becomes weakened as blood flows through there. Just like if you had a water balloon hooked up to a faucet or something, with enough pressure, it would start to inflate, okay? There's two big types of aneurysms that can kill you very quickly. One is a cerebral or a brain aneurysm. It's when blood, it pops out. Eventually, say like this berry aneurysm, there's different types depending on where they're at in the brain. Eventually, it fills up enough just like a balloon, and it pops, okay? Blood leaks into the brain. Neurological complications and possibly even death. You've heard people maybe say, like, when they've had this and survived, it was the worst headache of my life. Another aneurysm that can kill you very quickly is the abdominal aortic aneurysm. So the aorta, like we mentioned before, largest artery, it branches out the top of the heart, and then it branches out in these smaller ones, but a large section of it goes down through the abdomen. This is not a super common, I say that, but it does happen. You hear about these aneurysms a lot because people die from them, but it starts to balloon outward too. And that's because these walls are weakened. Sometimes because if there's a plaque buildup, say right here, above there is getting added pressure. So it can weaken those walls over time and eventually burst. So that's possible to kill you, an aortic aneurysm. Okay, so those are, aneurysms can occur at other places, but the ones you hear about most, because they typically, sadly lead to death, is a brain aneurysm or a cerebral aneurysm and an aortic abdominal aneurysm. The last little disorder I wanted to mention was varicose veins. Think about Mama's legs. Okay, varicose veins, they're not nearly as severe as the other things we talked about today, but all that happens is veins over time become poorly functioning because of their valves. Okay, so the valves that we mentioned in the vein that keeps blood flowing through those veins and eventually back to the heart, those valves become weakened and some blood kind of releases backwards and the flow is not nearly as good. And what can happen over time is they start to become a little kind of lumpy and lopsided and thickened. I say Mama's legs because, typically over time it may look like this. Somebody, not everybody, but they may look like this. And that's what we call varicose veins. Like I said, not life-threatening or anything like that. It's just a sign my veins are getting worn out. So this is part 2. Feel free to use these notes on your quiz and on your blood flow activity coming up.